This week is Parashah Vaera, and it's from Exodus. You know what? We're on the wrong place. You're in Genesis. You're fixed it yet? Exodus 6:2 through 9:35. All right? And Vaera, it means, and I appeared. And so Hashem does to Moses in a new and exciting way. It starts out like this. It says, God spoke further to Moses and said to him, I am Adonai. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, yet by my name Adonai I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their pilgrimage, where they journeyed. So this week's Torah portion opens with the verse that says, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as the Almighty Shaddai. All right? But by my name, Yod He Vav He, I did not make myself known to them. All right? Why are there different names for God? How many names have you got, Hal? I mean, just one is enough, isn't it? Yeah. But for God, there's different names because each one has a different significance. The Midrash asks the same question, and in resolution, quotes God as saying, I'm called according to my deeds. Each of the different names of God is associated with a particular quality or attribute. All right? The ancient teachings expand further on this concept, deriving different insights from the letters of the names and their vocalizations. The name Shaddai contains the Hebrew word dai, and it means enough. All right? And indeed, an explanation of the significance of that name, according to our sages, they quote God as saying, it was I who told the world enough. In other words, Shaddai refers to the aspect of godliness that establishes limitations on the world's existence, concentrating on God's infinite light in a measured manner that will enable the creation of a world in which godliness is mostly hidden. God's name Adonai, Yod He Vav He by contrast, represents the revelation of godliness in all its infinity. For that reason, the name Adonai, Yod He Vav He, is never pronounced. All right? Its light is too powerful and all-encompassing to be expressed by mere mortals. All right? On this basis, we can understand the interchange between Moses and God. At the conclusion of last week's Torah portion, Moses had complained. Of course he did. That's what we do. He had complained that after he had communicated God's demand that Pharaoh release the Jews, the Egyptians' oppression had become more intense. God answered by saying that the world was about to experience a fundamental change in its nature of divine revelation. Until this time, even spiritual giants like the patriarchs received only a limited revelation of godliness, for godliness was meted out within the context of the name Shaddai. Amen. That is according to the limitations that prevailed in the world. But in the future, Jewish people and the world at large would receive a revelation of the name Adonai, Yod He Vav He, revealing God's infinity. In order to receive that revelation, though, the Jews and the world had to be purified. And the means of purification God chose was severe hardship and oppression experienced in Egypt. From that time onward, things changed radically. First of all, there were overt and apparent miracles. The plague showed how the natural order could be bent and broken at will. Beyond that, the Jews left Egypt. Now, the Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim. It relates to the word Mitzarim, which means boundaries or limitations. The Exodus represents a departure from the boundaries and limitations of ordinary material existence. And we as believers have all had our experience of being let out of our limitations. But the ultimate revelation of God's name Adonai, Yod He Vav He, came at the time of the giving of the Torah. From that point forward, every time a Jew performs a mitzvah, he establishes an essential bond with God relating to a higher rung of godliness than even the patriarchs could ever access. As it's written, as in the days of your exodus from Egypt, I will show you wonders. For the cycle of exile and redemption in Egypt is a paradigm for a lot of parallel cycles that the Jews and in fact the entire world have experienced in our history, including the penultimate cycle, which we will reach its culmination with the redemption from our present exile. Like the redemption from Egypt, indeed to a far greater degree, the redemption from our present exile will involve a change not only in the material fortunes of the Jewish people, but in the spiritual gestalt that prevails in the whole world. At that time, the world will be filled with the knowledge of God like the waters cover the depths of the sea. This code will be unraveled, and the pattern of apparent limitation associated with God's name Shaddai will be seen as a means of enabling His infinite goodness to be internalized within all of us in the world. Now, this process is ongoing. Every day as we proceed further in deepening our connection with God and fulfilling our mission in refining the world, we bring closer the conclusion of the days, in the plural, of our exodus from Egypt and create a backdrop for God to show us wonders with the coming of the Mashiach. Now let's get back to our Torah portion, starting in verse 5. You got here just in time. Furthermore, I have heard the groaning of Bnei Israel, whom the Egyptians are keeping in bondage. So I have remembered my covenant. Therefore, say to Bnei Israel, I am Adonai, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from their bondage. I'll redeem you with an outstretched arm, with great judgments. I'll take you to myself as a people, and I will be your God. You will know that I'm Adonai, your God, who brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, and give it to you as an inheritance. I'm Adonai. Moses spoke this way to Bnei Israel, but they didn't listen to him because of their broken spirit and the cruel bondage. So Adonai told Moses, go, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that I will let Bnei Israel go, so that he will let Bnei Israel go out of this land. But Moses said to Adonai, Lord, the children of Israel haven't listened to me. How would Pharaoh listen to me? I who have uncircumcised lips. And then Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron and gave to them a charge for Bnei Israel and the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring Bnei Israel out of the land of Egypt. And then we see a litany of the tribal generations through the sons. But finally in verse 20, we read this. Amram married Jehoshaphat, his father's sister, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. Amram lived 137 years. So right away we know something's up with this particular family, right? And then it goes right back to naming the sons. But in verse 26 we find this. These are the same Aaron and Moses to whom Adonai said, bring Bnei Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their divisions. These are the ones that spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring Bnei Israel out from Egypt. These are the same Moses and Aaron. So it happened on the day that when Adonai spoke to Moses in the land of Egypt, that Adonai said to Moses, I'm Adonai. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I tell you. But Moses said to Adonai, I am of uncircumcised lips. So how would Pharaoh listen to me? So Adonai said to Moses, see, I have set you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother will be your prophet. You are to speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother is to speak to Pharaoh, so that he will let Bnei Israel go out of this land. Yet I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh will not listen to you, so I will lay my hand upon Egypt and bring forth my armies, my people, Bnei Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. The Egyptians will know that I am Adonai when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out Bnei Israel from among them. So Moses and Aaron did as Adonai commanded them. Verse 7, Moses was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. And so we see Moses and Aaron going to Pharaoh, but since God had warned them that Pharaoh wouldn't let them go, guess what? He didn't let them go. And then we see the plagues start. This week, we only learned of the first 7. Blood, frogs, lice or gnats, flies, livestock, boils, and hail. This week's parashah, in the midst of this week's parashah, we see this amazing teaching, and we find a rather odd comment. Now, Moses has argued with God about his calling. Of course. Moses didn't have a chance when he argued with God. Anybody here ever argued with God? Did you win? Nope. Not me. He was going to Pharaoh, but Adonai has a real encouragement for him in verse 2 of chapter 7. You're to speak all that I command you, and Aaron your brother is to speak to Pharaoh, so that he will let Bnei Israel go of this land. Verse 3, yet I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, but Pharaoh will not listen to you. Thanks, Lord. You give me this task, and then you tell me how impossible it is. Yay, God. So I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring forth my armies, all right? And the Egyptians will know that I am Adonai when I stretch out my hand against Egypt. I think God tells us, all right, in verse 7 it says, Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. I think God tells us their age to warn us against trying to get out of God's service by saying, Lord, I'm just too old. What do you think, Hal? Are you too old? Not a chance. Not a chance. Not a chance. God seems to be placing stock in the process of the Exodus as vital to how we construct our sense of ourselves. All right? It seemed to be insufficient to only acknowledge that there was an Exodus. We would seem to have to acknowledge the plagues and the signs as well. Now, the medieval commentator Rambam, in his commentary on the verse regarding tefillin, all right, this. He says that God will not perform a sign or a wonder in every generation or for every evildoer or heretic. Now, I'm struck by this in particular because it's repeated theme of too many believers today, you know. They feel if God did a miracle now, I could believe it. Guess what? God's not going to do a miracle for every generation. Nope. And guess what? That's why we wear tzitzit, to remember the Exodus, the events. All right? According to Rambam, that's the reason eating leavened bread incurs excision, because it implies a forgetting of the events in Egypt. It is for that very reason that we're supposed to wear tzitzit, to remember the miracles and the wonders of Egypt, and it's for that very reason that we verbally articulate our memory of those events every single day. Now, twice a day, Orthodox Jewish men wear tefillin, little box here and a little box here with straps, all right? And they recite the entire Shema, not just the abridged version that we pray. You know, and we pray twice a day. The full Shema is in 3 paragraphs from Scripture, and these 3 are all inside the tefillin that Orthodox Jewish men wear. The first paragraph is the one that we always do. It's from Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These words I command you today are to be on your heart. You're to teach them diligently to your children. Speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. Bind them as a sign upon your hand. They're to be frontlets between your eyes. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. But the second part of the entire Shema is from Deuteronomy 11, 13 through 21. It says, now if you listen obediently to my mitzvot that I'm commanding you today, to love Adonai your God and to serve him with all your heart and soul, then I will give rain in your land in its season, the early rain and the late rain, so that you may gather in your grain, your new wine and olive oil. I will give grass in your field for your livestock, and you will eat and be satisfied. Watch yourselves so that your heart is not deceived, and that you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. Then the anger of Adonai will be kindled against you, so that he will shut up the sky, so that there will be no rain, and the soil will not yield its produce. And then you will perish quickly from the good land Adonai is giving you. Therefore you're to set these words of mine in your heart and in your soul. You're to bind them as a sign on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes. You're to teach them to your children. Speak of them when you sit in the house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You're to write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be multiplied on the land Adonai swore to give your fathers, as long as the heavens are above the earth. And then the third part is from Numbers, chapter 15, verses 37 through 41. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, to Bnei Israel, say to them that they are to make for themselves tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and they are to put a blue cord on each tzitzit, so it will be your own tzitzit. So whenever you look at them, you will remember all the mitzvot of Adonai and do and do them, and not go spying out over your own hearts, your own eyes, prostituting yourselves. This way you will remember and obey all my mitzvot, and you'll be holy to your God. I'm Adonai your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I'm Adonai your God. Amen. See, when we recite the Shema, we aren't just recognizing that God took us out of Egypt, all right? We are daily saying that we recognize our belief system, our way of life, and our adherence to a set of rules and customs are predicated in a view of human history in which there is a God who rules the course of that history and who's able and is even sometimes willing to radically intervene in the course of that history and in the course of nature. Amen. Amen. I like that. Our sages tell us that the creation of the entire world is considered a worthwhile endeavor just for the acceptance of the yoke of heaven that we enact during our daily recital of the Shema. It is said that one who prepares himself for prayer in the proper way, who recites the Shema and then prays, has fully accepted the yoke of heaven. When a person reciting Shema remembers the unity and the kingship of the Almighty, who supervises everything, he will take to heart that God's eyes observe all of a person's ways. He will appreciate that God counts our steps and that none of our thoughts are hidden from Him. Amen. Ooh. Thinking this and saying this will guard a person throughout the day, and repeating it at night as well. According to the ancient sages, the reward for reciting the Shema at these times is greater than the reward for studying Torah during the rest of the day, and Torah study is considered greater than all the other mitzvot combined. But the overall overview of our parasha is quite interesting beyond this one more significant detail. That's a sign that I should take a sip of water. I'm good. Oh, all right. But when it hits my foot, it goes, drink something. All right, God reveals Himself to Moses employing 4 expressions of redemption that give us the reason for drinking 4 cups of wine at Passover, all right? Beginning in Exodus 6:6, therefore say to Bnei Israel, I'm Adonai, I will bring you out from under the burden of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments, and I will take you to myself as a people, and I will be your God. Those 4, all right? Here we have 4 expressions, and they're used with regard of redemption of Egypt: release you, save you, liberate you, and take you. Now our sages note that the 4 cups of wine we drink at the Passover Seder correspond to these 4 expressions. Accordingly, the following question arises. Bearing in mind that we eat matzah at Passover because our ancestors were liberated from Egypt, why don't we eat 4 matzahs? We only eat 3 matzahs. All right? Well, evidently there must be 2 aspects to the exodus from Egypt. One that is composed of 3 details, and one that is made up of 4. All right? What are these 2 aspects? Thank you very much. I'm schwitzing. All right. At the time the Jewish people departed from Egypt, they were not spiritually worthy of redemption. All right? We weren't good people. In fact, according to the sages, had they remained in Egypt one moment more, they would have become forever mired in impurity. Notwithstanding their state of depravity, God in His infinite kindness revealed Himself to them, and He redeemed them anyway. This is why the completion of the Exodus came about only when the Jews received the Torah. For complete liberation of Egypt requires the newborn nation rid itself of Egyptian impurities. All right? This was accomplished as the Jews prepared themselves in the days between the Exodus and the receiving of the Torah. They achieved such heights that by the time the Torah was given, they could justifiably be called a holy nation. The difference between the symbolism of matzah and wine should be understood accordingly then. Matzah emphasizes the aspect of the Exodus that came about as a result of God's redemption from the impurity of Egypt. God redeemed us in spite of ourselves, all right? It's for this reason that matzah is called impoverished bread, bread that lacks taste, for it's a remembrance of our spiritual impoverishment. Taste, though, refers to something a person can appreciate in some way. Since the liberation from Egypt originated from above rather than from the spiritual preparation of the Jewish people, it's understandable that it lacked taste. The Jews were compelled to leave. But wine, however, has taste, and it's enjoyable. It's a remembrance of the liberation and freedom ultimately achieved by the Jews. That is, it was through their own service that they were redeemed from the evil of Egypt. So the reason for 3 matzah as opposed to 4 cups of wine becomes clear. There's a difference between the first 3 expressions of liberation and the 4th. In the first 3, I will release you, I will save you, I will liberate you, are aspects of redemption that took place immediately upon departure from Egypt that came from above. The 4th expression, I will take you unto me as a nation, it depended on the Jewish people to have become worthy of becoming God's nation. And this was experienced only when they received the Torah, when they accepted the Torah. Thus, matzah is equated with the number 3, corresponding to the first 3, and the wine alludes to the liberation completed. At the beginning of the Torah portion, Vaera, the verse states, and the Lord Elohim, Elohim is the name that's symbolic of strict justice, spoke to Moses and said, I am God. Rashi comments, he says, God spoke sternly to Moshe because Moshe was severe in speaking and saying to God, why have you dealt badly with this nation? Moreover, Rashi, quoting the Midrash on the verse, says, and I revealed myself to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, writes that God said to Moshe, alas, for those who have passed on and whose likes are not to be found, I mourn the passing of the patriarchs. They did not question my action as you question my actions. How is it possible that Moses, the select of mankind, questioned God's actions? And to compare him unfavorably with the patriarchs? Well, Rashi comments and says, and I revealed myself to the patriarchs. What does Rashi add? The verse itself goes on to say that God appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. By stating to the patriarchs, Rashi is in effect saying that the clear and unequivocal revelation of godliness to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for which reason they did not question God's actions, stemmed from the very fact that they were the patriarchs of the Jewish people. In other words, such revelations were granted to these 3 in order that they might bequeath them to their descendants as a father bequeaths to his son wisdom. Accordingly, the question becomes even greater. Since the Jews enjoy the revelation of godliness as an inheritance from the patriarchs, how is it possible for Moses to be critical of God's actions? The sages explain to us that the exodus from Egypt came about in the merit of and as a reward for the Jews' belief in God. Amen. This means the revelation within the Jewish people of this essential aspect of their Jewishness made them somewhat worthy for redemption. Even in the midst of the most severe Egyptian oppression, the Jews were called believers, the children of believers. But this inherited, almost unconscious belief, this baseline belief, was not yet fully developed and revealed within them. In order to be redeemed in their own merit, it was necessary for the Jews' natural belief in and unity with God to consciously be recognized and become whole in their lives. This is what Moses was able to accomplish, for herein lay the difference between him and the patriarchs. As bequeathed by the patriarchs, the essential hallmark of Judaism are something every Jew has as a natural consequence of being a child of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses' question, why have you dealt badly? And God's response, I have revealed myself to the patriarchs, should therefore be understood accordingly. Since the time of the Jews' liberation from Egypt was fast approaching, and Moses was acting as God's emissary to redeem them, it was necessary that the people's inherited belief in God come to permeate them completely. Moses' question, why have you dealt badly, elicited God's revelatory response, Vaera, which brought the Jews to so believe in God that faith penetrated every fiber of their being, even the lower levels of their intellect, the levels that give rise to doubts, would now be permeated with unquestioning belief in God. Amen. The redemption came about as a result of Moses' question and God's response. And that's that. But I've got a rather interesting question for you. Why do we stop with 4 cups of wine? You see, there's 4 points of redemption, right? But guess what? Verse 8 says, so I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and give it to you as an inheritance. So why don't we drink 5 cups? Well, because until a generation ago, that was unbelievable. There's no way God was going to bring us back to the land of Israel. A generation before us couldn't believe it. But you see, when God redeems us from something, He always redeems us to a place that He's prepared for us. Amen. So to summarize the parashah, Moses and Aaron repeatedly came before God to demand in the name of God, let my people go so that they may serve me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh repeatedly refuses. Aaron's staff turns into a snake, swallows the magic sticks, the Egyptian sorcerers, and God then sends a series of plagues upon the Egyptians. And then we see the first 7 plagues. The waters of the Nile turn to blood. Swarms of frogs. The frogs kills me, all right? Because Moses goes to Pharaoh, and he says to Pharaoh, you don't like the frogs, huh? When would you like them to leave? And what does Pharaoh answer? Tomorrow. Tomorrow? Tomorrow? Yeah. Anyway, so we see the frogs. Then we see lice infect all men and beasts. Hordes of wild animals invade their cities. Pestilence kill the domestic animals. Painful boils afflict the Egyptians. And the word boils could probably be better translated as hemorrhoids. For the 7th plague, fire and ice combined to descend in the skies in a devastating hail. And still, the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he would still not let the people of Israel go. And that's it for this week.